The knocking at his library door at midnight was not the knocking of any servant, and the Duke of Westhaven, who had been brooding over a decanter he had not touched, called out, "Enter," chiefly to discover who in his house had the nerve. The nerve belonged to a young woman he had never seen before, in a plain travelling gown and a dressing shawl clutched over it, her dark hair loose and wild about her shoulders as though she had risen from her bed and never once stopped to think what she looked like, which he would learn was precisely what happened. She came 3 steps into the candlelight, planted her feet, and said without preamble, without curtsy, without the smallest visible fear of the most powerful man in the county, "You have ruined an innocent girl's reputation with a single careless word, your grace, and you are going to unruin it before this night is out, or I shall not leave this room." Emrys, Duke of Westhaven, set down the glass he had not been drinking from and looked at the apparition in his library with the first genuine interest he had felt in a great many dull months. She was, he gathered from her breathless indignation, a Miss Tamsin Hale, companion to the elderly Lady Corvish, whose house party filled his east wing this week, and whose guests he had been enduring with his customary poor grace. And the innocent girl was one Miss Prudence Corvish, Lady Corvish's timid niece, about whom the Duke had said, carelessly, half attending, that he could not tell one insipid debutante from another. They all wore the same face and wanted the same thing. He remembered saying it. He had thought it a very mild remark. He had not thought about it again for one instant. Miss Hale had evidently thought about it a great deal. The remark, she informed him, still standing, her hair a dark storm around a face bright with fury, was repeated within the hour. As any remark made by a duke at cards is always repeated, and by supper it had become that your grace found Miss Corvish insipid and grasping and could not bear the sight of her. She is 17. She overheard the last of it, whispered behind a fan. She has cried herself into a fever. Her aunt is threatening to send her home in disgrace before the week is out because a duke has declared her a fortune hunter, and the girl has done nothing but be shy and young, and unlucky enough to be in a room where a bored, careless, powerful man said an unkind thing to amuse himself and never troubled to think that words from a great height land very hard on the small people below. So, you will write to Lady Corvish tonight. You will say you were misquoted and that you find her niece a charming girl. And you will mean it enough that it is heard. And you will do it because it is right, your grace, and for no other reason, since I have nothing to offer you and nothing to threaten you with except my own extremely poor opinion, which I assure you I hold very firmly. The Duke of Westhaven had not been spoken to in that manner since he was a boy in short coats. He discovered that he liked it enormously. "Miss Hale," he said, and there was something at the corner of his mouth that had not been there in months. "Do you know what hour it is?" "I know precisely what hour it is. I waited until the house was asleep because if I had come to you in daylight, before witnesses, you would have been obliged to be a duke about it, and I did not want you to be a duke. I wanted you to be a person briefly at midnight, when no one is watching and there is nothing to be gained but doing right. I am aware," she added, with a flash of grim honesty that he found he admired, "that I ought not to be in a gentleman's library in my dressing shawl with my hair down at 12:30. I am aware of exactly how this would look. I decided a girl's whole future was worth the risk of it. Now will you write the letter or will you not?" He looked at her a moment longer. The wild dark hair, the flushed cheeks, the shawl clutched tight, the utter fearless absurdity and gallantry of it, and something in the Duke of Westhaven, which had been asleep or perhaps merely bored for a very long time, woke all the way up. "I will write the letter," he said, "on one condition, that you sit down, take a glass of the wine I have not been drinking, and tell me your extremely poor opinion of me in greater detail. I find it more bracing than anything I have heard at that insipid card table all week." "I have not the least intention of drinking your wine at midnight, your grace. That is precisely the sort of thing that ends a woman's." The library door opened. It was not a servant this time either. It was Lady Corvish herself, in a dressing gown and a candle, drawn from her bed by some noise in the sleeping house, with 2 of her guests crowding curious behind her, and she stopped dead in the doorway at the sight that met her. The Duke of Westhaven, on his feet and near enough to touch, and her own hired companion, Miss Tamsin Hale. Alone with him in his private library at midnight, in her dressing shawl, with her hair loose down her back. There was a silence of the sort that changes lives. Miss Hale, breathed Lady Corvish, in a voice that promised the ruin of 100 generations, in his Grace's library. At this hour, in your, I do not have, the woods. The Duke of Westhaven watched the colour drain from Miss Hale's furious face and understood, in the space of a heartbeat, exactly what happened and exactly what it would cost her. She had risked her whole future to save a girl she scarcely knew, and the risk had come due, in the doorway, in front of witnesses, at the worst possible moment, and by every hard law of their world she was ruined now, dismissed by mourning, unmarriageable, unemployable, cast out without a character, all for the crime of being brave on someone else's behalf at midnight. He could let it happen. It was nothing to do with him. A duke stood entirely untouched by a scene that would destroy a companion. That was how the world was built, and no one would have blamed him for stepping back and letting Miss Tamsin Hale fall. He stepped forward instead. "Lady Corvish," said the Duke of Westhaven, and his voice was warm and easy and carried an authority that stopped her mid-word. "You find us out. I had hoped to make the announcement rather more gracefully in the morning, but I see there is nothing for it." He crossed to Miss Hale, who was staring at him now with an alarm quite different from before, and took her cold hand firmly in his, and turned with it to face the doorway and its witnesses. "Miss Hale did me the very great honour, not 1/4 hour ago, of accepting my proposal of marriage. She came to plead a kindness for your niece, which, I may say, does her more credit than anything I have witnessed under this roof all week, and I am afraid I detained her, and pressed my suit rather harder than was strictly proper, because I have been half in love with her wit since the hour I met it and could not bear to let her leave the room unclaimed. The fault and the impropriety are entirely mine. You are the first to wish us joy." Miss Tamsin Hale opened her mouth. He tightened his grip on her hand. The smallest pressure, "Trust me, wait," and she, being quick, shut it again. Lady Corvish's fury collapsed like a tent in a wind and reassembled itself, with astonishing speed as delight. A companion caught in a compromising position was a scandal to be crushed. A companion betrothed to a duke was a triumph to be dined out upon for a decade. Married to, oh, your Grace, we are how perfectly. Prudence, she cried to the corridor. Prudence, come and hear. His Grace is to marry Miss Hale. Was there ever? I always said that girl had something about her. And she swept out in a rustle of vindicated gossip to wake the entire house, her guests tumbling after, leaving the Duke of Westhaven alone once more with the woman whose future he had just. In a single reckless sentence, entirely rewritten, Tamsin snatched her hand back the instant the door closed. "Are you mad? What have you? You cannot simply announce, Your Grace, I did not accept anything. There was no proposal. You have just told a room full of the greatest gossips in the county a thing that is not true." "It was not true 1/4 hour ago," the Duke agreed. "I find I should very much like to make it true now, which is a different matter entirely, and rather more in my own gift than a letter to Lady Corvish." He looked at her, and all the easy authority had gone out of his voice, and what was left was oddly unsure. A thing his household had not heard from him in years. "Miss Hale, Tamsin, consider your position honestly as you consider everything. You were found alone with me at midnight with your hair down. In our world that ends you this hour, no matter how blameless the cause, and the cause was entirely blameless, the cause was the finest thing I have seen in a 12-month. I will not stand in a doorway and watch a woman be destroyed for the crime of being braver and better than everyone else in my house. So I gave the truth a different shape. But understand me." He took a breath. "I did not do it only to save you. I have been bored to the roots of my soul for months, and you walked into my library at midnight and told me exactly what you thought of me, and I have not felt so awake since I cannot remember when. I said I was half in love with your wit. I lied. I am wholly in love with the woman who would risk her entire future at midnight, for a shy girl she barely knows. I have never met her equal. I do not expect to again." Tamsin Hale, who had come armed with a full and firmly held poor opinion, found that it had deserted her entirely. "You do not know me," she said, but faintly. I know that a careless word of mine wounded a child, and you came alone through a sleeping house to make me mend it. I know you would not touch my wine because you would not risk even the appearance of a thing, and then risked everything itself the moment a girl's future required it. I know you told me to be a person at midnight when there was nothing to gain but doing right, and I have decided, Miss Hale, that I should like to be a person at midnight and every other hour for the rest of my life, provided it may be done in your company and under your extremely poor and improving opinion. Emery's Duke of Westhaven smiled, and it transformed his brooding face entirely. I could not tell one insipid debutante from another. It is the truest thing I said all week. And then you came in with your hair down and your chin up, and I could not and cannot, and shall never again be able to tell you from the whole of my own happiness, marry me, Thompson, not to save your name. Because I cannot spare you from my future, I have only just found you in it. She looked at him a long moment, the fury quite gone now, something warmer and more wondering in its place. And then, because she was honest always, even against her own defenses, the corner of her mouth curved. You are still going to write the letter, she said. Tonight, before anything else. Miss Corvish first. Miss Corvish first. He agreed at once, and his heart leaped. Because that was not a refusal, that was a woman negotiating terms. Charming girl. Wholly misquoted. I shall be effusive. And you are going to be a great deal less careless with your words hereafter, because I mean to be within earshot of most of them, and I shall not let a single unkind one pass. I am counting on it, said the Duke of Westhaven, very much. Then yes, said Tamsin Hale in his night library, with her hair down and her chin up and her poor opinion entirely overthrown. You impossible, careless, unexpectedly decent man, yes. Now sit down and write to Lady Corvish about her niece, and I will tell you where you have gone wrong in the wording, which I promise you that you will. He sat down and wrote the letter. She told him where he had gone wrong in the wording. He was, in fact, wrong. They were married from that very house before Lady Corvish's party had properly dispersed, and Miss Prudence Corvish, restored to health and reputation by the most gracious letter a duke had ever penned, was a bridesmaid. And for the whole of his long and lively life, the Duke of Westhaven, once the most bored and careless man in the county, was never bored and never careless again, because the woman he had married had confronted him once at midnight with her hair wild and her heart brave, and he had discovered, to his everlasting good fortune, that he could not live a single dull day without her.